Thank you, Professor John Milner. Thank you, Elena, for inviting me. And of course, thank you for all the nice words you said about George Kostakis. I would only like to mention that it is 100 years since Kostakis' birth. He was born in 1913. So our museum and the State Tretyakov Gallery, where the other half of the collection is yes, we have the plans to reunite the collection, and the first idea was to do this in 2014, next year, because it would be the Greek-Russian year, but the year was postponed, if a year can be postponed, to 2016. And so our plans now is to make a big show in 2016 and a catalogue raisonné of the whole Kostakis collection. So I hope it will happen. In any case, both our museum and the State Tretyakov Gallery celebrate this year 100 years since Kostakis' birth, and we did some common conferences and things together. Thank you again. I'm going to speak about Tatlin, and I'm going to read my presentation because I feel more safe reading it, and this means I will be more boring than the previous brilliant speakers. I will speak about Tatlin. Vladimir Tatlin is generally considered to be the father of constructivism, a title, however, he never accepted for himself. The reason for conferring the title is the fact that when in 1913 he made his counter-reliefs, he was the first artist to use combinations of different materials such as wood, metal, glass, stucco, fabric, metal cable for the construction of non-objective artworks, in which the form dominated the content or the theme. He called them counter-reliefs in order to stress that these objects were far from the usual notion of a relief. And they had nothing to do with traditional sculpture. But the main reason why Vladimir Tatlin was considered to be the first constructivist artist is his work for the Monument to the Third International, the so-called Tatlin's Tower. In his manifesto called The Work Ahead of Us, that was written in 1920 for the Daily Bulletin of the 8th Congress of the Soviets, Tatlin wrote, among other things, that the results of his work are models which stimulate us to inventions in our work of creating a new world and which call upon the producers to exercise control over the forms encountered in a new everyday life. This was the basic idea of the constructivist theory as it was described in different manifestos after Tatlin by Alexei Gan, Alexander Rodchenko, the Sternberg brothers, Osip Brik, and others. Tatlin's grandiose project for the Monument to the Third International certainly became the center of discussion in Russia and soon became known abroad. It was especially hailed by the Dada artists in Germany, who considered it as a revolution in art. Designs for the tower were published in Bruno Taut's magazine Frühlicht. This photograph shows George Gross and John Hartfield during the first international Dada fair in Berlin in 1920. Holding a placard saying, "Art is dead, long live Tatlin's machine art." And this is a photograph from the same exhibition. Tatlin became a legendary artist and a symbol for the artist of the future, as depicted in Raoul Hausmann's photomontage, about which I'm going to speak later. Tatlin's Tower gave the first impulse to a collaboration of artists from Moscow and Berlin, which was very fruitful in the early 20s. El Lisitsky and Ilya Ehrenburg were the publishers of the pro-constructivist Soviet-German French magazine Versch Gegenstand Objet. And in 1922, the famous Russische, I'm not a German speaker, but Lutz, help me please, Ausstellung exhibition was organized in Berlin by Lissitzky. The exhibition moved to Amsterdam, and soon the still artists in Amsterdam, along with the Dadaists in Berlin, declared the Constructivist International. There are several self-portraits of Tatlin, as well as portraits made by other contemporary artists, such as Mikhail Larionov, Vasily Chakrigin, the poet Vladimir Hlebennikov, and others. One of the well-known portraits of Tatlin is the collage work by L. Lissitzky titled Tatlin at Work. It was published among the illustrations of Ilya Ehrenburg's 6 Tales for Easy Endings in 1922. Watercolor, ink, pencil, and paper collage on paper were the techniques employed. The original collage work was presented for the first time at the Grosvenor Gallery in London in 1962 under the title Tatlin at Work on the Monument to the Third International. If we observe the existing photograph, which actually shows Tatlin with his assistants working on the Monument to the Third International, we can find out without doubt where the figure comes from. Another interesting point is in this Tatlin's portrait is that L. Lissitzky presents the artist not with the actual model of the tower, but with drawings of his own prones. L. Lissitzky was a painter, photographer. We heard about L. Lissitzky before, so we know that he was one of the closest collaborators of Kazimir Malevich at the UNOVI school in Vitebsk, and in the period 1919-1921, he produced this series of floating spheres which create to the spectator, who is invited to mentally revolve the spheres, the illusion that he is spinning, turning around some hypothetical center of gravity. This idea reminds a lot of the dynamic city about which Christina Loder spoke earlier. And this is a drawing that also comes from the Kostakis collection from the State Museum of Contemporary Art, and you can see it. You can see that it is repeated in Lissitzky's portrait of Tatlin. In the collage drawing Tatlin at Work, it seems as if Lissitzky becomes intentionally identical with Tatlin. He either gives Tatlin the role of the spectator, and thus Tatlin becomes part of Lissitzky's prone constructions, or he invests Tatlin with the role of the artist who created the prone. In that case, the work is a portrait of Tatlin, but at the same time, it is a self-portrait of Lissitzky. Of course, Lissitzky made this work for illustrating Ilya Ehrenburg's short science fiction story entitled Vitrion. In this story, the main hero is an imaginary constructivist artist named Vasily Belov, who created a robotically moving construction named Vitrion. This construction, which was also designated as the monument of the new era, was not merely moving, but it also acquired a lifelike existence. It fell in love with a lady called Lydia Stepanovna Barikova, impregnated her, and the so-called child of a new species of human beings appeared on Earth. Therefore, Belov was not only the creator of Vitrion, but also the creator of the new humankind. The head of the woman in Ehrenburg's science fiction story can be seen on the top of the collage leaning vertically with 2 quadrilateral stripes, a shorter white and a longer red, crossing each other. And there is also a curved white stripe somehow crowning the woman. The white stripe shuts the mouth of the woman as if somebody is forbidding her to speak. In the short story, Belov is also in love with Lydia, but he cannot understand her. The two-dimensional, or the opposite, the two-dimensional quadrilateral stripes remind us of a suprematist painting. We know the complicated relationship between Tatlin and Malevich, and here Lisitsky may be making his own criticism to Tatlin's attitude towards Malevich and suprematism. Lisitsky was a student and a supporter of Malevich. On the other hand, he admired Tatlin, but in his writings, he criticized him for being too romantic, for using the material in a sort of a fetish way, and so on. We know that on the 10th of December of 1920, and I found this in your book, Christina, in a public discussion held in Moscow, Lisitsky was very critical of Tatlin's tower, but at the same time, he was among those who voted that the tower should be constructed. There were many conflicts in this discussion, and there were many constructivist artists that were against building the tower, and Gabo was the most critical of all. In the collage, Tatlin appears unable to see, but through compasses and rulers occupied with geometrical shapes and mathematical formulas, all of them tools of architecture, but the face of beauty, apparently standing for pure art, not only stays outside the frame of the painting and the frame of his interests, but is also viewed behind rectilinear and curvilinear geometric shapes. At the same time, with this suprematist touch in the portrait, Lisitsky may be showing the inability of Tatlin to follow Malevich's suprematist theory, which, though also depending on geometrical shapes, retains the essential ingredient of spiritual purity, rejecting utilitarianism. For Lisitsky, this was a defect of Tatlin's work as a whole. In 1918, the Dadaist artist Raoul Hausmann started also using photographs in his art and became one of the initiators of the new type of art called photomontage. The second portrait I would like to present is the one made by Hausmann and is titled Tatlin at Home. This work was made in 1920, and it is a portrait which, unlike Lisitsky's portrait, does not look like Tatlin. What makes this portrait more interesting is that Hausmann never met Tatlin. He is using Tatlin as a symbol for the message he wants to convey to the world. After the First War and the obvious need to rebuild not only Europe, but the society as well, Hausmann believes that rational thinking is what is needed for the progress of society. Tatlin, who was promoted by the Dada artists during the first International Dada Fair in Berlin in 1920, corresponded to such beliefs. Before constructivism had become a conscious movement, Tatlin had shown that he was using art for practical reasons and for the sake of the society. The artist should offer ideas to architects, engineers, and designers. There should be an objective in the art, and Tatlin served as the best example to illustrate these ideas. The machine which replaces the brain in the head of the man, who is supposedly Tatlin, is juxtaposed to a wooden stand that shows the organic functions of the human body. The rational mind dominates everything. Hausmann, as a promoter of the peaceful and progressive society, shows also that the rational mind makes calculations, makes correct decisions that lead to the progress of the society and not to war. The man with the empty pockets, the map on the wall, and the propeller tells us that the world is moving without purpose if left without the rational mind. Both portraits are not portraits of Tatlin in the traditional sense, but serve as symbols for Tatlin's pre-constructivist method that is based on the creative use of human intellect and modern technology. We always refer to Tatlin as the artist who conceived two utopian, we call them, constructions that were never actually materialized. The monument to the Third International and Veli Tatlin. Tatlin had a special attachment to the concept of the tower. Back in 1914, he named his studio in Astozhenka Street, number 34, Bashnya, it means tower. It was open to the public in order to present, for the first time, Tatlin's three-dimensional art objects. 10 years after he made the model to the monument to the Third International, during the period 1929, Vladimir Tatlin set up a workshop in the bell tower of Novodevichy Monastery in Moscow, and I'm very pleased that John Milner mentioned that before. There, with the help of students from Moscow, of Hutemas, he worked for the project of the construction of his flying machine, Veli Tatlin. You can see the bell tower and what we saw from John Milner earlier. In 1940, Alexander Deineka made this painting of Nikitka, the hero of a popular myth. I'm not going to repeat what it was said. And you see that Deineka put his hero on top of a bell tower. As he mentions, I have painted him at the moment of flight. Nikitka, yes, the flyer. The moment of maximum muscular tension, the moment, let us say, at which we see most clearly his determination to fly. The composition is vertically structured with a low horizon, leaving much of the canvas representing the sky. I extended the bell tower to the very top of the canvas in order to show the highest point of the city, at that moment setting it on the bank of the river. And Nikitka is placed in the foreground, writes Deineka. Maybe Deineka wanted really to pay tribute to Tatlin when he put Nikitka in his painting on top of a bell tower that is really very, very similar to the bell tower of the Novodevichy Monastery, where Tatlin worked for the creation of his Le Tatlin. But at the same time, I think in 1940, it would be quite difficult to say that I make a tribute to an artist of the avant-garde. Irrespective of the symbolic meaning of the project's abandonment right before the enforcement of the socialist realism, both the Tatlin Tower and the Le Tatlin were constructions that failed to be materialized, not because they were stopped by censorship or because of political reasons, but because they had defects in their own initial design and needed emendation and improvement. And this is a reconstruction made in Greece by the Greek architect Yorgos Athanasopoulos. At the same time, both the Tatlin Tower and the Le Tatlin influenced, and still do, a big number of artists and architects. Hence, many institutions made commissions for the reconstructions of these two objects, which are made to restore the value of an artistic object which was not materialized, and thereby pay tribute to the artist himself and stress the value of the so-called utopian work of art, and also to get into the experiment of Tatlin's culture of materials, always an important task for artists and architects. The interesting fact that the reconstructions are limited to the aesthetic value of the two works, and there is no attempt to improve the project or correct possible mistakes, make us wonder on the purpose of such reconstructions. One would expect that somebody would improve, for example, the Le Tatlin in order to succeed in making it actually fly. But finally, I think this question, especially today, proves to be completely unimportant. And as Boris Groy stresses out, machine and technical progress should first suffer defeat. If they are to be aestheticized, they should first lose the practical value in order to obtain the value of art. There are several interesting articles about Tatlin's reconstructions written mainly by the people who made the reconstructions. I can name a few. Pontus Hultén, who wrote about the reconstruction of the Tatlin Tower, yes, which was commissioned by the Moderna Museum in Stockholm. Valerie Fletcher, who wrote about the reconstruction of the Tatlin Tower, which was commissioned by the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington, D.C. Dmitry Dibakov, who is, of course, an expert in Tatlin's reconstructions, and also the British sculptor Martin Chock, who reconstructed Tatlin's counter-reliefs. More than reconstructing the tower or the Tatlin, several contemporary artists used the original objects as an inspiration for new works of art. Dan Flavin's series of works, which include more than 50 wall pieces made from 1964 to 1990 and called Monuments to Vladimir Tatlin. Quite recently, in 2007, the contemporary Chinese artist Ai Weiwei made the Fountain of Life after Vladimir Tatlin's tower project, a glamorous version of the monument to the Third International, here it is in Venice, which acquires a sort of sacredness as it is so specially lit, and it becomes a symbol of the artist's struggle for the creation of new worlds. And another more humble tower is made by the Greek artist Kostis Velonis in 2009, an artist who uses the Russian avant-garde as an inspiration for his work. And 3 years ago, in 2010, the Russian artists Igor Makarevich and Yelena Yelagina put the Tatlin Tower, as you can see, on top of a sculptural composition with mushrooms. And also about the Tatlin. There are many examples. These are only very, very few, of course. The Russian artist Leonid Sokov, who emigrated to the United States in 1980, revived the Tatlin project in a variety of ways, reconstructing one of the few surviving original parts of the wing and presenting it as a whole, as a work of art in its own right. This is the original Strat wing, which is part of the Kostakis collection at the State Museum of Contemporary Art. And this is the reconstruction of Sokov, who presented the wing as a work of art. And Sokov returned to the theme in the 1990s, and the following decade, we see the Tatlin flying, but with a wooden bear to symbolize Russia, I guess, or with a cage in the place of a man. In this 2000 postage stamp, Tatlin's tower serves as a symbol of Soviet construction. Shown next to Vera Mukhina's well-known sculpture, the peasant woman and the worker, Tatlin's tower receives all the qualities of a built construction, so that eventually the difference between the project and its materialization is not noticeable. The Tatlin has become a commercial project, too. Not as a flying machine, but as an idol of the original object. In collaboration with the Museum of Architecture in Moscow, architect Vasily Shetinin created and put in production Ikarushka, what he called a modular kinetic model of a human being with a 5-meter wingspan. Ikarushka, as a matter of fact, is a name from Mitki, yes, not from the Letatlin, but anyway. In the advertisement of Ikarushka, we read, "We can foresee that Ikarushka's future is happy, all over the world, even better than Letatlin's. Soon he will be everywhere. Every snob and every gog, every architect and every businessman, every estate and every engineer will have one. You can't stop admiring Ikarushka's human, immensely expensive poses. Everyone who ever dreamt about flying above the ground will want one. Everyone who craves freedom and easy living. Everyone who wants to feel the volume of his or her home. Everyone who is able to destroy dull everyday surroundings by adding this stylish element. There is a multitude of reasons to fall in love with this wonderful invention by Vasily Shetinin, which, by the way, is patented in compliance with all rules and regulations." And I'm finishing saying that at this point, it is worth mentioning that Tatlin was not the first avant-garde artist to construct a flying machine. Pyotr Miturich, who had been a pilot during the First World War, had begun designing and building small models of flying machines which were supposed to fly without an engine in 1921. Pyotr Miturich had used the term letun, one of Khlebnikov's neologisms, yes, along with letba. He used this word, which derived from the verb letat, also to fly. But his son, which is here in this photograph, Mai Miturich, who is seen with his father's model in this photograph from 1984, made by photographer Igor Palmin, used to call it, as a joke, Leturich, to emphasize the similarity with Tatlin's Letatlin. So what one can conclusively say is that both the tower and the Letatlin, despite having proved defective and thus not materialized as they were initially planned by their author, were never considered as failed projects. I would dare say the opposite.